Good evening. Welcome. We have two meetings tonight. The first is a meeting of the Cunningham Town Board. It's Monday, April 2nd, 2018. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustees Ammons.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Hazen.
Here.
Jacobson. Here. Miller.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Wu.
Here.
Chair Marlin.
Here. Next up is minutes of the previous meeting. We have two sets, one from March 5th and March 12th, 2018. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll move approval. Second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Aaron. Are there any corrections? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay, those minutes are approved. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay. Public participation. Does anyone wish to address the Cunningham Town Board? I do have two for the City Council so far. Okay. Committee to verify bills. Ms. Chenoweth?
Sure. So this month we had $50,366.29 in expenditures from the town fund, and we had $39,616.53 from the general assistance fund. The total is $89,982.82. Any questions about the details?
Bill?
Just on the emergency assistance, about $10,000, I think it was. Did we have a separate line item budget for that, or is that coming out of personal allowances? Or
So if you look, it's line item 6731. It's the last one on the page. It doesn't come out of personal allowances. One thing that did come to my attention when I went to the Township Officials of Illinois conference and was speaking to them about emergency assistance is that oftentimes comes out of the GA fund and not the town fund. So when I budgeted this, which was a few weeks into or a few months into my tenure, I put it under town fund, and so we may at some point need to do a budget amendment to move that over to general assistance. Otherwise, basically, it's a separate line item. It's just a question of which fund is appropriate for it to come out of.
okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved. I'll second.
Moved by Aaron, seconded by Dennis. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Reports of officers.
So let's see, in terms of statistics for this month, as you'll see, basically we see a steady increase, both in terms of walk-ins and participants in our two signature programs, the general assistance and homeless assistance. So we registered 99 walk-ins in March. That's up from 86 last month. We're still trying to figure out when that'll top off. I assume it'll be topping off at some point and we'll kind of level out. We have gotten control of our pending applications. We were up pretty high to 50 apps and put in some extra time, got that down to 28, which is pretty much going to be standard. It'll be in that like 15 to 30 range. In terms of general assistance participants, we're at 81, up from 76 last month. And you'll see I did a new breakout. I'm still trying to figure out like what data is relevant, and once we get our data points, I can do some like graphs and mapping. But I've started to add how many are homeless, because the homeless numbers are really significant. It's 27 of the 81 participants are homeless. And homeless essentially means they are unsheltered or living in a shelter, and the only shelter that's open at this point is the domestic violence shelter. So there are several folks who are in the DV shelter. Otherwise, these are actively unsheltered people in Urbana. Just so you know, when someone is actively homeless, I don't have them working on workfare unless they seem to be desiring that or functional, or it seems like that's a stepping stone. So we really try to deal with the housing issue first, because they're basically in survival mode on a daily basis. So you'll see that the various numbers add up to 81 there. We still have 7 senior citizens. That seems to be standard, and the average age is still 47 years old. We had 4 recent terminations, 2 moved out of the township, 1 transitioned to TANF, which is a temporary aid for needy families. If a child's guardian, if a guardian of a child comes in, they can receive general assistance from us while they're waiting their TANF application. Once they receive TANF, then they're off of general assistance. And then we had 1 non-compliance with work search, which he will admit he was not compliant. So we had some conversations. The homeless assistance, since the program started, that was right before Thanksgiving. We've had a total of 102 residents representing 45 households and 59 children. So we basically are now to the point where over 50% of the people we're serving with homeless assistance are children. I just want to point that out because that continues to be an alarming trend. And you'll see, there's 3 categories that I think are useful to look at: unsheltered and moved to permanent housing, which is, we want that number to be as high as possible, right? Because we get people in permanent housing. That was 14 households or 21 people. Unsheltered moved into a hotel room. And just for the record, sometimes those folks end up in permanent housing. They're kind of in a transition period. And if so, they only get counted as permanent housing. So the folks who are unsheltered moved into a hotel room are 23 households, 64 people. And then we prevented homelessness through eviction for 8 households or 17 people. And again, that's people who have a 5-day notice and no other place to go. They don't have family or friends they can move in with in the community. I'll get to the depository pledge when we get to that item on the business. I do want to just give a heads up that our office has started the budget process. I'm working with the assessor line item by line item to look at what we spent this year and what we project for next year. We anticipate at this point putting the budget on file with a budget hearing with you at our May board meeting, and confirming the budget at the June meeting. So getting back on a sane cycle with that. But I do want to just say, if you have any input in terms of budget priorities for this next year, my door is open to you. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. Just a reminder that the SOAR workshop is coming up. We'd really like to see elected leaders participate. That's going to be Thursday, May 17th from 8:30 to 3:30 at Brookins. Complimentary lunch is provided, and if you're interested, please let me know. It's a good way to learn about both the problem of the disabled not having access to federal payments, the long process and difficult process it takes for someone who is clearly disabled with medical verification to actually start getting payments, and then some of the things we as a community can do to accelerate that process. And this is good for every taxing body in the area in terms of saving taxes, keeping people out of jail in the emergency room, and saving case management time. So it's really important that we put our heads together as leaders to think about how can we really move folks who are disabled onto payments from the federal government. And Cunningham Township is leading that process with the continuum of care. I just wanted to point out, and I know there was a piece in the paper about this, but both winter shelters for the homeless are closed as of today. CU Men's Emergency Shelter in Austin's Place. Unfortunately, the organizations plan based on dates and not the weather. And so what we have is essentially a situation where it's below freezing and there's no place for people to go. And it's a shelter. That said, what was not reported in the News Gazette, and I'm going to follow up with them, is that the townships, both townships now, are offering emergency assistance. It's a big step that City of Champaign Township is offering that. It's offering it through a referral process. So folks can come to us, and if they're in Champaign, we refer, or other agencies in town can refer. So if there are folks who are actively homeless, it's really important that they come to our office. That said, I think we need to put our heads together in the next year and coming years to see how we can really have year-round emergency shelter for men, women, and trans folks in our community. And I have some thoughts about that I'll share at a different time. A note that nonprofit organizations seeking funds to operate social service programs that benefit Urbana residents are now welcome to apply for social service funding. That's a pool that last year amounted to $250,000 between the city of Urbana and the township. We collaborate in providing the social service funding to groups. And it's important that they apply by April 26th. That's the deadline. And they'll need to watch a video on the website to find out. It's mandatory that they go through that training in the application process. And just the last thing I'll mention, it wasn't in my note, but I think you got word of this from the mayor, that I am now officially allowed to vote on the Housing Authority Board. This is good because there are some things I would have liked to have done at the last meeting that I was unable to because I could not vote. So I'm looking forward to, I am your appointee, and what that means is that I consider it a collaboration with the council members and the mayor to really look at how we address the crisis of affordable housing and low-income housing in Urbana, and I want to do that with you. So sure, I'm sitting there at the table with the Housing Authority, but I'd really like to keep you in the loop and continue to get your input. Thank you, Dennis, for showing up to the meeting, and Diane, who've come to meetings. I would encourage you to stop by third Thursday of the month at 3 o'clock, even if you can't come every time. If you could come once and kind of see what it's all about, I would encourage that. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Wayne. He has a report. But before I do that, if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. Mary Alice.
So my question is, what percentage of people move from, you said that some people move from the hotels to permanent housing. Do you have a rough estimate of the percentage of people who do that?
That's a good question. I would say almost every single person you see here was in the hotel room for a period of time, but you should know I'm not double counting. So if somebody went from a hotel room and then into permanent housing, I count them as permanently housed. But nobody comes to us and we're able to get them in housing that day, so they almost always go into a motel room first. We try to keep that to 2 to 3, 4 days. I can get an average of how many days they stay, but my guess is the average is about 10 days that folks stay in a hotel motel. And then we're able to get them because we negotiate with the landlord. We sometimes set up payment plans for deposits. We help people, like today we helped a woman clear her utility bill, so her children moved into housing today. So we're basically take that time while they're in the motel to try to clear up issues that might be barriers to them being in housing. And folks are really great collaborators in that they work every day, all day on this, and we are able to move pretty quickly as a result.
So the 64 people are people who were not able to move into permanent housing?
Correct.
Correct?
Yes, so they're either folks who are pending, like they may move in this next 15 to 30 days, and you'll see that then filled with new people who came in, or they're just unable to. And the folks who are unable to, we're trying really hard to work more closely with the what is called the emergency family shelter. It's not really emergency because it takes weeks to months to get in. But essentially it is a pathway for families who don't have income. So I've got a family with 2 premature kids, 2 preemie babies, where she is not able to work because she has so many medical issues she has to work out. Folks who are disabled and can't work, or they're, if they attempt to work, they will lose their disability and they can't. Situations like that, or there's quite a few folks who have felony convictions, which ends up being a really formidable barrier to both housing and employment in our community. So those folks, with the exception of the felony conviction, we tried to get them into the shelter for families. Folks with violent felonies are not allowed at the emergency shelter. I don't understand why, because they're separate units, and I'd like to discuss that with the steering committee, because I think that is a barrier for a lot of our participants getting from the motel situation into that emergency shelter, which then can sometimes be a pipeline into housing vouchers and other programs. So we have to solve that problem. The problem is people who are not able to work, they're still or disabled, there are significant issues getting them into housing.
Okay, thank you.
Eric?
So the Housing Authority is an arm really of HUD. And HUD, among other things, is charged with addressing housing discrimination. And I wonder if that connection can somehow probably something we should talk about offline, but I just want to put the idea out there. I wonder if that connection could somehow be leveraged to get some action on policing racial and other housing discrimination in Champaign and Urbana.
Well, one thing that this board can do, either as council or the town board, is to actually make a motion at some point to recommend to the housing authority that they change their policy, which has actually become more restrictive recently. The policy used to be that folks with felony convictions, certain kinds of felony convictions within a certain time frame were barred from accessing housing at the housing authority, including the voucher program. And those vouchers can be used in Urbana, and Urbana doesn't allow discrimination based on felony convictions, so there's that issue. It's now the case, and I can get you the exact language, that it's basically anyone with any criminal record, misdemeanors, felonies, et cetera, goes through a screening process. And that process isn't always clear. It's been done by the executive director over the last year, but we have a new ED that's coming in. So I think, like, with the new executive director and you as an appointing authority, this is a great time for your voice to be heard on that issue. And I think making a formal motion or statement as a body would be appropriate. And that way we can, but I'd be happy to get you the exact language of what the language used to be, what it is now. And then the third thing I'll give you is a letter from HUD to all housing authorities in the United States saying, watch out, you shouldn't discriminate against people with felony convictions, or you could run afoul of your local human relations commissions and your local ordinances. That was under Obama. And it was, a classic Obama move, which is say something that you think everyone should do, but it doesn't have teeth behind it. So it's good, it's important, but it didn't necessarily come with any, it was just kind of a warning. But it does show that HUD on this issue has actually been counter to the local housing authority. The local housing authority is far more restrictive in terms of who they allow in than HUD requires them to be. There's only a few, like sex offenders and others, who are not allowed by law, by HUD law. So if you're interested, I'll put together a little package of what the current status is, and I can send it to all of you, and maybe you would consider making a statement that we could convey to the housing authority.
I mean, it might be something as simple that they shouldn't discriminate in any way, that we don't permit discrimination in Urbana. Be
nice for perhaps the Human Relations Commission Chair and the Human Rights Commissioner to maybe give a presentation then on, because a lot of people I'm finding out talking to landlords don't actually know what the law is. We'll talk about that at a different time, but they don't, the law is not, it's supposed to be actively, folks are supposed to be actively educated, and they don't always know what the law says, and sometimes they're very willing to correct once they know, so. Any other questions before I pass it to Wayne? Okay.
Good evening, everybody. At the end of March, my deputy assessor and I attended the Illinois Property Assessment Institute Assessor Spring Training, where we both took courses to further training. I took classes to further my knowledge in homestead exemptions and preferential assessments, while Katie took a class to learn more about individual real estate transfer declarations, also known as green sheets, to see how they affect sales ratio studies. It's always our goal to make sure we are informed to best serve the township. And some interesting facts that I learned is if you are a disabled veteran, 70% or more, as determined by the VA, you are exempt from property taxes. And marijuana growing facilities are to be Texas farmland, which I thought was interesting. So, interesting nuggets from the conference. During April, I'll be looking at our 3-year sales study to assure proper factoring is done. There will be neighborhoods that will see a positive factor applied to assessments this year. If my office were to not make any factoring changes, the county assessor will apply a factor to the entire township to bring our values where they estimate they need to be. I'll break down neighborhoods both by geography and class. Breaking them down by class means that our commercial properties will be kept separate from our residential properties so that any larger commercial sales do not skew sales studies. Also, we will be asking for additional funds in next year's budget to prepare for technology upgrades. Because of decisions yet to be made at the county level, we're unable at this time to estimate how much will be needed to fund technology upgrades. However, without this information, we'll still need to update our current software to proceed with a more accurate mass appraisal system. And lastly, my office has posted 2 positions. We've had 4 applicants for one and 19 for the other. And the next step will be to convene the hiring committee. Any questions?
Eric?
Oh, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm really concerned about this one big property, namely the hotel, and whether it's going to be possible to bring that up to an assessed value that reflects the bona fide bid that was made for it that the owner rejected, which would really bring a lot more revenue to the city. I know it's only one property, but it's a massive property.
Well, outside of a general reassessment year, and our next general reassessment year is 2020, as assessor, I can't just pick on one property to raise or lower their assessment. So, I mean, I could do classes of properties, like, you know, I could do all hotels or all warehouses or all. Yeah, I just can't single one out outside of a general reassessment year. Now, I mean, there are some exceptions. For example, if there is a renovation to a property that affects value. So I'm not talking about like if you get new siding on your house or new windows, unless there's a significant quality upgrade. You know, I could use, you know, if you add square footage, if you add a deck or something like that, I can single out a property to you know, add to the assessment to reflect that. But as far as just looking at one property just to raise them, it just doesn't work that way.
So, okay, so the fact that, you know, there's new information about what its market value is that didn't exist before,
Well,
that's not sufficient.
well, what you're referring to as an auction? And
Yes, I'm referring to the auction at which there was a $4.5 million bid, and I believe that the property is assessed now. You can correct me, you know this better than I, but I believe the property is assessed now as though its market value was under $1 million.
Right, and you know, per Illinois Department of Revenue guidelines, auction sales aren't what we consider valid sales, and this didn't actually sell, so I wouldn't be able to use that regardless.
Wow.
But again, just singling out one property, I mean, again, like if they did some major renovations or anything like that, I could use that to single out an individual property, but just barring that, I really, my hands are tied.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Wayne. New business?
So we have resolution number T 2018-04-002R. And this refers to, this is a resolution authorizing the Cunningham Township Supervisor to sign a depository pledge agreement with Busey Bank. And very briefly, this is all good news. When I first came in, I was really appalled at how little we were getting for interest. It's still the case that as a government entity, we're much more limited than I thought. I was, you know, seeing 8 and 10% returns in my mind's eye. That's not possible without assuming a risk that I think is not appropriate for the township. So what I have been able to do is negotiate an increase in the interest rate from 0.15%, which made less than $4,500 last year on $3 million in the bank, which is really, unfortunate. Been able to negotiate a rate of 1.35%. And that is done by changing how we collateralize our funds. We would transition, if approved, the township accounts, they'd still stay at Busey, and they'd still have the same numbers, check numbers and everything, but they'd be moved from the bonds we're currently using to Federal Home Loan Bank letters of credit. That's through the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And I looked into it. This is approved under the Illinois Public Funds Act, and it's a simpler form of collateral. I called everybody that I knew in the finance world to ask questions, it seems like it's solid. It doesn't introduce significant risk, and is higher than what we could secure from the Illinois Fund, which is what I was looking at doing initially. Our agreement does not bind the township for any specific period of time, so if we find better terms elsewhere, we could consider moving. But Busey's also let me know that they're really interested in matching anything that I find, so hopefully we can stay here at home. So I'm requesting authorization to sign the attached agreement, and it does have 3 names on it in total, Charlie Smythe, Wayne Williams, and myself, who would be authorized to speak to the bank about the issue. I saw a hand. Did you have a question?
Aaron?
Yeah, I think my question was maybe a little bit outside of what you're proposing, so I can wait until we
Okay.
finalize this.
Bill?
Yeah, thanks for looking into this. I think that'll make probably, $40,000 difference or something per year?
I'm hoping. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to spending the money on something useful for the board. So.
So is this a variable interest rate? I mean, will it change over time if the interest rates continue to go up?
It does. I mean, so as you'll see in the contract, there's not a fixed rate that's in the contract. But so basically, I'll watch this along with other options, and hopefully this will be our best choice in terms of a collateralized option for us.
Okay, and then I think this $3 million is what we're supposed to be holding in case we need to pay back taxes. Is that right?
No, it's less than that. It's closer to $1 million that is to be held.
Okay.
And so, typically you keep a certain amount of operating funds in the bank. You have a certain amount that's held for the property tax disputes, and then the rest is some savings that was accumulated because of basically the reduction of the rolls over a 4-year period, steady reduction of the rolls.
Okay.
So I think, one of the reasons that I'm engaged in doing a strategic plan that I'll be hopefully bringing to you close to the new fiscal year so that we can look at it going into this second year, is looking at where it makes sense for us to invest as a township. Are there capital improvements we need to consider? Are there additional program spaces? Do we want to develop a partnership with other agencies and, tackle the fact that we have no emergency shelters year-round? These kind of things I think would be useful for us to consider. Because that money really does belong to the poor. I mean, in my opinion, it was taken from them, and it needs to be returned to them. So
I guess I was just wondering if some of it isn't going to be needed for a whole year. I think you can get 1 year. I know you can get 1 year CDs for about 2%. So
in terms of holding it,
maybe $1 million or something in a 2% CD. You might look into that, or probably have to do 4 CDs so they're insured. But
yeah, I have to look because the CDs I have to then collateralize them potentially. I mean, it would be worth looking. I read our our investment policy that was created in '99, and it actually provides a lot of discretion to me as supervisor. Actually, I think more discretion than I should have, honestly. So I may bring that back to you to look at it, because I really think that a single person should not put the savings at risk. I think it'll be important that the town board look and see what kind of investment decisions we're making. What I understand from talking with various bankers on this is that as soon as you collateralize a bond, that's why we're holding it in a bond now, and it's 0.15%, because the collateralization process reduces the interest rate that you would receive. That's my understanding. But I will definitely look into it. I certainly would like to see if we could get more than 1.35%. I asked Elizabeth at the city and if she was getting anything better, because I could do whatever the city is doing, and she thought this was a pretty good deal in terms
Yeah,
of interest rates.
I think
so-
several of us asked Elizabeth when we saw this.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Jared?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve resolution number T-2018-04-002R, a resolution authorizing the Cunningham Township Supervisor to sign depository pledge agreement with Busey Bank.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Dennis. Any further discussion? Do we need a roll call? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Zammons.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Hazen.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Roberts.
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. Aaron?
So, in another role that I play as a trustee for the State University Retirement System, I hear a lot about investment managers now being, they work with a lot of municipalities to invest money that, that's, for lack of a better term, it's in limbo. It's not being used, it's sitting there, but it's not gaining any particular interest. And I know that as the city, we have some of those types of investments. Is there something that prohibits, with the surplus that you have, that prohibits the township from being able to invest that in that way?
Well, my understanding and looking at it is this is the best investment that we can collateralize that I have been able to find. So essentially, I've been out there talking with, you know, I have a personal financial consultant. I spoke with him. I had reached out to Elizabeth. I reached out to the City of Champaign Township, and reached out to Toy, Township officials of Illinois. So I was looking at essentially what are some of the options available. So I could potentially engage the services of an investment firm if I felt like they could do something better.
Well, the reason, because it sounded like there was you had to mitigate risk, or is that a statutory thing, or is that just from a fiscally responsible standpoint? you
So
were speaking
the
of?
short version of the story is that the federal government will basically guarantee up to $250,000. So when you have a bank account, as long as your bank account doesn't get over $250,000, that if the bank was wiped off the face of the earth and something happened, the feds would walk in, as long as the feds are in good shape, and would basically help make up that difference, right? As soon as you go over 250, you're no longer collateralized. So different options I've looked at is, can you have different bank accounts at different, can you have money at different banks that's not collateralized up to 250 and get interest rates? It gets kind of tricky because you have your money all over the place and you're trying to make sure that you're moving your bills, but that is an option. The other option is to see, is there a way that I could take a nugget and actually Wayne, who, has significant experience in finance, and I have been sitting down and looking, is there a way that we could tear off pieces of this, under 250, not collateralize that amount, and look to see if we can get greater investments. But I do want to, I want to proceed with caution and prudence, especially because I just think we're in a kind of volatile time in terms of the market. So, but if you have anyone that I could speak to about that, I'd be happy to talk with them. And I
There's
am
a list
looking
of different folks that we could possibly just have a conversation with. I don't have
Absolutely,
anybody
yeah.
specifically in
Please
mind.
connect me. I'd be happy to talk with them.
Okay.
Any other comments? Just to follow up on the Housing Authority, I did want to let people know that beginning this month, Urbana Public Television will be recording the meetings, and they will be then archived on the website and available for view on UPTV.
I think there's a lot of members of the public that you just made very happy by saying that, because that's been at the last meeting, that was the #1 public comment is, can you at least put this on television so that we can keep track of what our housing authority is doing and not have to show up at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, which is hard for a lot of work.
They won't be broadcast live, but they will be broadcast.
That's fine. That's great. Thank you for saying that.
Well, with no further business, did we vote? Yes, we voted. With no further business, this meeting is adjourned.